Hello, friends. Good morning. Happy Friday, actually. Yes, I am recording today's episode on a Friday. Uh, Fun fact, I did record this on a Monday, but I made the grave error of keeping Lulu Joy home. And while let's just say Homegirl had some opinions and they were she was a little loud, and in the post edit I was not able to clean that up, so I am taking a second crack at this episode. So again, hello. For those of you who are checking out my pod for the very first time, welcome. My name is Libby, and this is my audio journal, Finding Joy in the Shadows, where I spend time each week talking about the fun curveballs life throws our way and help us look for pockets of joy. This is also an opportunity for me to continue working through my own stuff, my own struggles, while also sharing ways to help anyone who might be listening work through some things in your life that you might be working through or struggling with. So the goal is that we can all find joy together. For today's conversation, I picked a light topic. Just kidding. We are actually going to focus on how we can still find some joy even during an election cycle. I know, I know, I'm going to go there. But before we get started, let's go ahead and spend a few minutes catching up on what's been happening in the world. Dive into a few LPs that were on my radar the last 2 weeks. So, little confession to make. I did take a week off during the 4th of July. I didn't record an episode that week. Um, I legit was still recovering from my birthday festivities. Work has been grinding, pushing me to go beyond 120 miles per hour. And that week of the 4th of July was also the week I published my very first episode. So many emotions. Not gonna lie. I think I went through about 250 panic attacks before I finally found the courage to hit the schedule to publish button. I kept thinking, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? Why am I doing this? Don't do it. Don't. You're about to make a complete fool of yourself. What are you doing? But eventually I found some courage and I hit the publish button. So as of this morning, my podcast, well, yeah, as of this morning, my podcast has now been live for 3 whole weeks. I have 3 episodes published. So far, I've had over 100 downloads. A little over 300 people are listening to little old me. And my voice has even gone global. So someone from Tel Aviv tuned in to listen to my stories. So welcome. Thank you to everyone who is supporting me on this crazy adventure. I hope I continue to meet everyone's standards and that you like what I have to say. I'm a little behind the 8 ball on this one, still learning what I don't know. Um, but if you would like to send me a note, ask me a question, or if you want to tell me something really snarky, well, now you can. Feel free to email me at libbysaudiojournal@gmail.com, or you can message me directly through the website at libbysaudiojournal.com. So libbysaudiojournal.com is the website, and you can message me happy things, snarky things, whatever you want. Um, I'll be looking forward to getting some of that feedback. If you go on to libbysaudiojournal.com, all of the pictures that were taken by the very kind, super talented Maggie Poole Photography. For any locals, I highly recommend scheduling time with her for your next photo shoot, whether it's for yourself or for your family. Um, I've already booked time with her for my whole family to take some pictures over the holidays, and I can't wait for it. Her mom, Chris, is one of my dearest, dearest, dearest friends. And when she told me last October, I want to say, that Maggie was leaving her corporate job to pursue her passion and build her own studio and company, I knew right away that I wanted to support her. Um, Maggie is someone who is kind, she's personable, incredibly talented, and I could go on and on because I absolutely adore her. And so Maggie, thank you for taking such amazing pictures. Um, if you want to see what those pictures look like, they're on the website. So go to libbysaudiojournal.com and you will see them there. So last week was the 4th of July. And as I mentioned, I took a week off between recordings to focus on work. It's been incredibly crazy at the moment. And I also needed time to recover from my birthday festivities. So as my peeps closest to me know, I'm not one that goes out really out anymore. Gone are the days of, whooping it up on the weekends. I'm usually in by 8, if not earlier than that. It's just, it's just not who I am anymore. So I genuinely needed some downtime to recuperate for not only going out Friday night past midnight, but Saturday night too. So this week is the 4th, and as a kid, I always loved the 4th of July. I loved the parades, the food, the fireworks. Oh, that smell of the fireworks is so good. I lived for all of it. And in high school, you weren't cool unless you were rocking one of the Old Navy American flag t-shirts. Does anyone else remember those? They were so good. Um, no matter what we did, some things were always guaranteed, right? It's the 4th of July. You're going to have good food. The weather is going to be really hot, very humid. And no matter where you go, you're going to be surrounded by gnats and flies, right? Like that's just kind of it. That's the agreement when it comes to, summer in Minnesota. It's just something we all agree to live with, right? But this year, however, Mother Nature tried really hard to derail our plans here in Minnesota, at least, with tons of rain. But thanks to my bestie Teresa and her cheese ball, shaped like a bald eagle, Mother Nature kind of backed down a little bit. We still managed to all gather at her house. We barbecued, ate, drank. Thanks to her brother Dan, we had quite the fireworks show. I will admit, though, I didn't stay for the whole thing. I left, I think, like around 5, and I was passed out sometime after 7. I remember seeing the clock hit 7, and then I was passed out. So I don't even know if I made it to 7:30. I was very tired. But I still enjoyed the day, and I had so much fun catching up with old friends, some of whom I hadn't seen since Teresa's last 4th of July barbecue. So it's been a minute since I've seen a few of my friends. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Over this past weekend, I finally got to see Beverly Hills Cop, the Axel Foley edition. And since this is being recorded a few weeks in advance, I don't think I'll be giving anything away if I talk about the show. And friends, I have to say, I called it. I did. I called it. In episode 2, I predicted when I heard that Kevin Bacon was going to be in the movie. I said in episode 2, I wasn't sure if he was going to be a good guy or if he was going to be the one behind the current crime wave that Axel was now going to have to save Beverly Hills from. And I was right. I mean, it's probably not a huge victory, right? If anyone else has seen the movies, the previous movies, we all know the formula. It doesn't take away how great the movies are anyway, but fun dialogue, theme song, just hits you in the feels. I loved seeing the original cast, and I found it interesting how they introduced Axel's daughter into the mix. I don't know if her storyline will continue moving forward. That would be interesting. But one thing that did stand out to me, it's kind of overarching theme of the movie, was accepting your missteps and apologizing where appropriate and offering apologies back where appropriate. And I just thought that, I think it's important to say those words, right? Taking that accountability where you are offering your apology and the person on the receiving end is saying, you know what, I wasn't perfect either. And I just, it made my heart smile because it's kind of what this whole audio journal is all about, focusing on things we can control versus things that we can't. Let's see. There's so much because I have 2 weeks of things that I was working on. So last week I also had the privilege and the pleasure of reconnecting with two very, very dear women in my life, one of whom I legit haven't seen in about 23, 24 years, no joke. Last Saturday I met up with lifelong sorority sister, wonderful friend, Miss Whitney. We met for brunch, and technically I guess we were at the same school in 10th grade, but we didn't know it until years later. We didn't actually connect until we were in college through our sorority. And now I have said this to Whitney in person, so I think it's okay if I say it here to my very tiny audience. But Whitney has always been like the prom queen in my life. She, when she walks into a room, she's just this tall, beautiful woman that like carries her own lighting with her. And I don't know if it's because she's just so tall, the sun doesn't have to work as hard to find her. I'm, speaking from someone who is 5 foot even, I'm always kind of standing in someone's shadow. But she is just one of the nicest people you will ever meet. And it was so fun to catch up on a one-to-one level and not in our usual group setting when we usually see each other. And it was nice to be able to kind of just put some of those pieces together of what we've been up to over the years, and realizing that our personal stories, how similar they are. Even though we haven't been around each other a lot for the day-to-day stuff, it was great to connect on a deeper level. So thank you, Whit. I love you, girl. I also, speaking of college days, I also had the opportunity to catch up with my college freshman roommate, Miss Holly. And oh my stars, oh my stars, the flood of memories that have been rushing back through my brain since the minute she emailed me. I'm smiling because I am just having just heartwarmed, fun memories. Holly is a personality, and it was nice to know that she hasn't lost that part of herself. Holly was the one who pulled me out of my quiet shell. I'm very introverted, which people are very surprised to hear, but I really am. I'm quite content with my small crew, hanging in my house, doing my thing. Like I do have to work really hard to put myself out there, to introduce myself and meet people. But Holly is just one of those people that it comes very natural to her, very social butterfly. And she pulled me out of my quiet shell. That girl had me running all over campus. We hopped from house party to house party. And before I knew it, I was back home for Christmas with a tongue piercing and a tattoo. She even introduced me to professional hair coloring. We began our journey together at the University of Minnesota, starting off in expanded housing at the Days Inn Hotel, room 201, right off University Avenue. I'll never forget. We eventually moved into Sanford Hall together. And I think those are about all the stories that I can share. We share a lot. We partied hard. We had fun, met a lot of boys, and that's about all I can share. I know I have some family that's listening in, so we'll just leave it there. But Holly and I, we will be forever bonded through some of the wildest times of my life. And I am forever grateful that my silly little podcast led her to reach out and we were able to reconnect. So tinkle, tinkle girl. Um, this past weekend, this most recent weekend, I had the privilege of cheering on my niece and godbaby, Miss Abby, in her very first fitness competition. Homegirl competed at the NPC Bodybuilding Championships Twin Cities Open. And oh my stars, watching her journey from when she was a college student who just wanted to get in better shape and to see her take it to where it is today, to now pursuing this as a career and just seeing her passion throughout the entire journey has been nothing short of amazing. My girl placed third place in the true novice category. So freaking proud of her. Not gonna lie, it felt a bit surreal posting her competition pics all over social media because I still see her as this little girl. And now she is just this amazing, super buff, powerhouse woman wearing this amazing, competition bikini, but let's be real, leaves very little to the imagination. But honestly, she looks freaking incredible. But I would say the best part of her outfit that day was her radiant smile. It was just such a joy to see just her glow, I guess is the best way. She was absolutely beaming with pride in herself. And she has every reason to feel proud. Abby follows a strict program. She keeps to a strict diet. She works out every day. She even brings her own food with her on trips. A few weeks back, we had all gone up to Duluth, Minnesota to celebrate my other niece's college graduation, Tori. And my poor sister, who was sharing a room with Abby, their entire room was flooded with all of Abby's food that she had prepared and packed, all of her supplements, all of her drinks, everything. She brought it with her. Um, and she's committed and she's a fierce competitor, and I cannot wait to see where she takes this next. So again, super proud, Abs. Congratulations. Um, all right. What else happened last week or the last 2 weeks? I feel like a lot. Um, so has everyone heard about the Boeing astronauts that are legit stranded at the International Space Station? Maybe this is why I've had to record a couple of times. I keep bringing this up, and so I wonder if my little podcast is getting sabotaged. No, I'm just kidding. But there are two astronauts that took the Boeing spaceship to space, to the International Space Station. It had been delayed multiple times. Finally, they got the go-ahead to launch. And this was a big deal because, back in 2014, Boeing received a billion-dollar contract with NASA to build the Starliner, this particular spacecraft. They designed it to be able to shuttle astronauts to and from the International Space Station. I don't know if it was quicker, but for whatever reason, NASA needed their help. And so Boeing was like, here we are. And so since 2014, they've been working on this. And they've been doing test flights. And, they've been having issues with the test flights, but, now they were ready to take people into these test flights. And so they had the astronauts slated. It got delayed. They were going to do it. It got delayed. And then they finally had liftoff and they were in space when they realized they were having issues. So thankfully, they were able to get the astronauts to the International Space Station, but now they don't know how to get them home. They are working on that. I saw an article the other day that said, I don't know why this makes me laugh. It's not funny, but it did. It was like, getting the astronauts home from the International Space Station is proving to be more difficult than thought of. And I wanted to just be like, okay, Captain Obvious, I could have told you that. And I don't have a science degree. I don't even have an engineering degree, but I could have told you a rescue mission to the International Space Station probably going to be a little bit more trickier than anybody could imagine. So yeah, I am no scientist. I'm not entirely sure what all of this means, but it's definitely doesn't sound good. The original plan was only for these astronauts to spend 10 days in space. That was back on June 5th. And so they've been there a very long time, much longer than they were supposed to, with no return date in sight. So I cannot imagine what they must be going through, what their bodies are probably going through. They probably didn't, prepare to spend this much time in space. So that is a concern on reentry, but also their families. I can't imagine what their family is going through. So we will see. But this kind of encapsulates why I even had so many pauses when I heard that SpaceX was planning to do something very similar. I mean, I didn't want to say this last time, but last time I talked about the SpaceX shuttle, but let's be real here. After last summer's debacle, where the billionaires took a game controller to see the Titanic wreckage in a ship that didn't have a single window, but whatever. Um, this worries me. I feel like we're rushing into these ambitious projects at the expense of human lives. I know that exploration is important, and I know that we should be pushing boundaries, whether it's exploring the depths of our ocean or aiming for Mars and beyond, right? That's what we're supposed to be doing, I think. But I really hope somewhere someone is remembering that at the end of the day, there are humans attached to these missions. There are families that rely on these people. And so I just, I pray for everyone's safe return involved, and maybe everyone can take a pause and just make sure that we're ready before we send people into outer space that we can't quickly retrieve. That's all I'm saying. Last, but certainly not least, if you've been waiting for the perfect moment to fill up that shot glass, go ahead, because we're going to dive into some BTS news. It was announced that JK and Jimin, their travel show that they filmed last summer, is now set to premiere on Disney Plus on August 8th. So that's in a couple weeks, and I am super stoked for that. The 30-second promo clip already has them belly shaking with laughter. And I don't know about you, but I could definitely use some of that infectious joy in my life right now. JK also announced that he'll be releasing a documentary about his journey that he went through recording his first solo album, Golden. And that documentary is actually going to be released in theaters. So very excited about the travel show, about his documentary. I've been listening to the Golden album pretty much around the clock since its release last summer. So it'll be interesting to see what this documentary looks like as a new army, as a baby army. I will be there, excited to learn how these documentaries, usually go. I already told my bestie Jessie that I didn't even ask her. I just said, "Oh, hey, this is happening, and when I get more details, you're coming with me." So just FYI, didn't even ask. What else in BTS news? Jin was in Paris and he ran the Olympic torch around the city for a few kilometers. Is that what they call it over there? A few miles. The amount of security guards, police, and volunteers that had to surround this man was quite surreal. But I was glad to see that he was well protected. I will say, I get it, guys. I get it. He is very handsome. Very, very handsome. I understand why his nickname is Worldwide Handsome. He is very pretty. So he did a great job. I am so stoked for the Olympics in a few days at this point, and I'm just very excited. All right. I can't think of any other topics or LPs that were on my radar over the last 2 weeks. So let's go ahead and dive in. As always, I usually have a nice coffee, but today I actually opted for a strawberry banana smoothie because it's kind of hot out and I don't know, it just sounded really good. Lulu is at daycare. I was not going to make that mistake twice. So no background opinions from the peanut gallery today. My girl, she is so opinionated, and she was so opinionated on Monday. I might release a few of the clips as bloopers once I figure out how to do that, because it really was quite funny. At least I find her quite comical. So we'll see if I can figure out how to do that. For the rest of our time together, we will be discussing ways we can still find joy and maybe a little bit of sanity even during an election cycle, no matter how crazy it gets. And it's getting crazier and crazier by the day. Oh my stars. Um, I know I am biting off way more than I can chew with this week's episode. But I feel like there is so much happening right now with wall-to-wall coverage, constant coverage about whether one candidate is too old to run or about another candidate could be in jail by the time voting even starts. It's clearly all anyone is talking about right now. So I thought, okay, let's dive in. Let's talk about it. I want to state that though before we dive in any further. I would be lying if I said I didn't have an opinion on who I hoped wins the election in November. Of course I do. I have my own thoughts, I have my own opinions, and I care about the outcome. But for today, today's episode isn't about debating who's right or who's wrong. Like I said before in my intro episode, there are plenty of platforms where you can have those discussions and you can find those people to debate. And you can go on those sites where people share their thoughts, their opinions, their facts, or their alternative facts, right? For today, I really want to try and focus on setting aside even my own opinions, my own biases, and share with you how I stay above the fray, or at least how I am trying to stay above the fray, right? How am I maintaining my sanity and holding on to my joy? So how am I doing this? How am I staying sane during not just any election cycle, but this one in particular seems different, right? Even the pundits describe this election cycle a little different than previous cycles, right? They're describing it like an intense, crazy making, possible doomsday end of times, could be the end of our democracy, might lead to a second revolutionary war. Did I miss anything in that description? Anyone else hear another way it's being described? Just reading those descriptions makes my blood pressure rise just a little bit. Well, so let's get into it. The debate a couple of days ago is what spurred this idea that maybe this is something I should talk about. So we're going to dive in. So let's talk about the debate. Well, first off, newsflash. I didn't watch the debate. Nope. I knew both candidates were there, got the news alerts, they both showed up. But I did not feel the need to watch the debate. I did not feel that watching the debate would add any value to my life. So I simply did not tune in. My TV was off, and I didn't even check on Threads or YouTube. I avoided it like the plague. I also didn't listen to any of my favorite political podcasters for recaps or opinions after. Nor did I read a single post-debate article or watch any cable news shows after. For the last handful of days post-debate, I was blissfully unaware of anything that transpired during those 90 minutes, and it was glorious. During the debate, a few friends reached out and were asking me, oh, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And it gave me this like great pleasure to be able to respond and say, listen, guys, I lived through 2016. I lived through 2020. Nothing new here. I'm not going to get anything out of watching this debate, so I'm not watching it. I'm lying on my couch, snuggling with Lulu Joy. TV is off, and I'm playing a game on my phone. And that was the absolute truth. So that was how I proceeded with my days afterwards. Just feigned ignorance, right? I I did not dive into the socials. I did not participate in any of the conversations. I didn't even listen to any of the post-election, recaps of any kind. But after the 4th of July, where I was sitting in circles, outside of my little protective bubble that I had created for myself, and I was hearing things for the very first time. And I was hearing people mention things for the very first time. And I heard people saying things that I thought, okay, well, maybe this is an opportunity where I could use this platform as a way of sharing other ways other people might be able to find a little bit of joy during the madness and the insanity of this election cycle. Based on some very, early analytics that I am able to see on the podcast, it's clear that I have two types of listeners right now. I have those of you who likely voted in at least one election prior to the one coming up in November. And I have some listeners where this is probably going to be the very first time that they're voting. So I'm going to break this next section up into two parts. First, I'm going to address the listeners that have most definitely either voted or at least had the opportunity to vote in one or more election prior to the one coming up in November. And then I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking to my younger audience. I'm sorry, that just sounds so weird to say, but I do want to break it up, right? Because there's two different stories going on. And so first part is going to be to my friends and family, like I said, who have at least voted in one election prior to the one coming up in November. These are also individuals who lived through 2016 with me, who lived through 2020 as well. And I think it's safe to say, if you are part of that category that I just outlined, you probably already know who you're going to vote for in November. Am I wrong? I don't think I'm wrong, right? I'm just like you. I lived through 2016, lived through 2020. I know almost everything there is to know about these two candidates, and my vote will not be changing between now and November. If you fall into this description, having lived through 2016 and 2020, and you are fairly certain you know who you will be voting for in November as well, then my advice is simple. Tune out as much of this stuff as possible. Stop following certain opinion leaders on social media. Stop watching certain talking heads on cable news shows, and really try to limit your overall exposure to just the noise, right? Don't watch the rallies. Don't watch any future debates. Don't watch the conventions, because that's all it is. It's crazy inducing noise. Okay. For those of you that have attended this circus before, again, especially with these two particular candidates, we know who we are voting for. So no need to engage into the political theatrics, because that's really all it is. So if you are one of those individuals that lived through 2016 and 2020, my best advice is to really try hard to tune it out. To my younger friends and to my younger family who this might be your very first time voting in November, or maybe you're someone who just never really paid attention before. And, but now you are, and you want to understand more of what's going on. So the rest of this time is going to be dedicated just to you. Voting in your first election is very exciting. I know I am planning to join my nephew Jackson when he goes to cast his first ballot. And I wish I could go with all of you and celebrate this monumental occasion. I understand your desire to want to get involved and to learn about what our leaders or what our potential leaders are saying. And I applaud your enthusiasm. However, I would not recommend diving into politics by watching debates or watching rallies to understand a candidate's platform. Why? Well, call me jaded, but an election cycle is political entertainment. I think it's political theater at its finest. Elections do not govern. Political ads, rallies, debates, these are all forms of propaganda. And it's crucial to be aware of this. The messages being broadcast during debates and rallies, these are crafted by teams of speechwriters. These messages have been diluted into 5-second and 30-second sound bites made specifically to be aired on cable news shows. These messages have been tested and retested by various groups, different genders, different races, and they've been repeatedly polled to help determine which of the talking points elicits the strongest emotional response. If this is brand new information to you, sorry to burst that bubble, but that is what an election cycle is. Those are the things that are taking place during an election season. So I'm going to take a pause. I'm going to have a sip of my smoothie while I let that sink in. To my friends that are new to elections and how governing works, I think before we dive further into strategies for staying calm, for staying sane and joyful, if you are new to this arena, I think it's important for us all to understand the basics. So I'm going to do my best to kind of break down everything at a high level, right? The Cliff Notes version. So that way I can help you navigate this complex terrain. And while I'm doing this, I am also going to try really, really hard to keep my own opinions and my own biases out of it. I promise I'm trying hard. So let's go ahead and start with some basics. Because if I were to just say, well, just don't pay attention, that wouldn't be good advice, right? I think it's important to educate yourself on the basics, and then we can talk about ways that we can stay above the fray. So let's break it down first. What is an election cycle? Okay. Well, first thing you need to understand about an election is that there are presidential qualifications. The Constitution only lists 3 qualifications to be the president. And what are those? Well, you got to be at least 35 years old, a natural born citizen, and you have had to live in the United States for at least 14 years. That's it. There's no requirement to take a cognitive test or to pass a 4th grade civics lesson, or no test to make sure that the candidate understands complex topics like how a bill becomes a law, or never is there a point in time where we ask the candidates, well, can you define what NATO is? Right? As long as they meet the main criteria, 35, natural born, lived for 14 years at least, they file their paperwork, raise their money, and they win, they're in. That's all it works. That's all it takes. Well, once we have the candidate, then we have to look at the Electoral College, or the Electoral College map, to be specifically. So when we vote for president and vice president, they are not voted in by a popular vote, meaning the one who gets the most points wins. And I know that is shocking. If you've ever had a conversation with my nephew, he will break it down how he truly feels about this process. But this is written into the Constitution. And so per the Constitution, this group of presidential electors is formed every 4 years during the presidential election to vote for the president and vice president. So now, according to USA.gov, I just want to make sure I'm sourcing where I'm getting this from. In other US elections, candidates are elected directly by popular vote, but not for president or vice president. They are chosen through the Electoral College process. And so each state gets as many electors as it has members of Congress. So I believe in the state of Minnesota that I live in, we get 10. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's 10. Probably should have checked on that before I hit the record button. And so what happens is when we go to cast our ballot for president, our vote in the state of Minnesota goes to a larger statewide tally. And the winner, or the candidate with the highest tally for the state, they're going to get all of those electoral votes for that state. Now, the candidates need to earn up to a minimum of 270 electoral votes in order to win the presidency. So that's how it works, right? You have your candidate, they've met the qualifications. Now we break down the states, and based on the number of members in Congress, that's how many electoral votes your particular state gets. When you go to vote, the person with the highest tally, they get all of those electoral votes. So it doesn't matter, I know a lot of times people say, oh, well, this person won the popular vote, but they didn't win the electoral college. Well, because it's broken down into states. So if 500 million people voted in the state of California for one person, they're still only going to get the same number of electoral votes. So while, yes, in the grand scheme of things, that person was more popular because they earned more votes, they didn't earn enough votes in other states. We're only looking at specific states. And so that is how we elect our leaders for president and vice president, is through this electoral process. Now, while the Constitution does not require these electors to vote for the candidate chosen by the state's popular vote, most states do. So what this means is when you go and cast your ballot and the Secretary of State he approves it and says, okay, X person got the highest tally. We're going to give them all these electoral votes. These electors, this is not just a random name. These are people that will say, okay, I will vote for that person. I will give my electoral vote. I'll give my electoral college vote to that person. It is not a requirement in the Constitution that person has to say, okay, could they change their mind and say, I'm going to vote for the other person. I'm going to give my electoral vote to someone else. Technically, they could. However, if an elector does vote differently, they could be fined, disqualified, replaced by a substitute elector, or even prosecuted by the state. So it's one of those things where it's not written into the Constitution, but it is extremely unlikely that anybody would do that. So this is where campaign strategy comes into play. So they take a look at the electoral map, and based on historical voting data, it is pretty safe to predict how most of the 50 states are going to vote. For example, California will most likely be giving all of its 54 electoral votes to the Democratic candidate. And I think it is safe to say that Texas will most likely be giving all of its 40 electoral votes to the Republican candidate, because past trends in history, right, historical data tells us this. Could it change in an upcoming election? Absolutely. It's not a guarantee, but it's historically how those states perform. So most political operatives, consultants, professionals, they will tell you that most campaigns do not have a 50-state strategy. Do they want to win 50 states? Of course. But they only need 270 electoral votes, right? That's it. That's all they need. And so they look at the mathematical way to get there. Why would they spend time in a state they already know that state's going to support their candidate? So they need to make sure that they're putting their resources and their money in the areas where they'll get their biggest return on investment. And so that's where the battleground states come into play. Battleground states are sometimes referred to as swing states or toss-ups. Basically, these are states that can go either way. Take that how you want. And in today's election cycle, elections are won by whichever candidate can secure the most votes within these battleground states. That's it. That's the whole ballgame. Now, it's important to note that these electoral maps, they are figured out well in advance of an election cycle. Each party has a chairperson, and this person is responsible for strategizing, for fundraising, all for upcoming elections. That's their entire job, is to continually strategize and to raise money. That's it. This leader uses the donations to set up election offices in as many states as possible. Why do you think that's important? Why do you think it's important to have local offices for your candidate? Well, it allows the campaigns to gauge voter sentiment. If you have a local presence, this helps you stay connected to what the community leaders are doing, what the community is saying. It helps you develop your ground game for your get out the vote effort. A good party chair will break down the strategy to a finite level of zip codes. They will appoint precinct captains that will assist in distributing yard signs, coordinating rides to the polls. They will be the ones organizing phone banking to collect voter data. If spending hours of your time, of your free time, calling through lists to help a campaign identify who their voters are, if that sounds exciting, well, consider voting for a campaign. I've done it a few times. It's fun, but it's tedious as well. In my humblest opinion, a campaign without a strong ground game has a very slim chance of winning. The point is, elections are like massive cargo ships. They take time to get up and running, but once they do, once they start moving, they are not able to pivot quickly. They cannot simply drop the anchor and turn directions quickly. Once they start moving, it's basically an all hands on deck, full steam approach. Historically, that is what we're looking at. Okay. How is everyone doing so far? Hopefully I'm not boring anyone. Like I said, I'm sharing these basics mainly for my friends who will be voting for the very first time in November. And, when I think back to when I was early 20s, right? 18, 19, 20, 21, I didn't retain a lot of this information that I learned from my high school days. And I think it's crucial that we start with an understanding of the fundamentals before diving into strategies for staying sane through it all. Again, I could simply just say, just tune it out, avoid it at all costs. But that wouldn't be good advice. So I wanted to make sure that we all had just very basic fundamental understanding of what an election looks like and how we pick our candidates and what voting looks like and a little bit of the strategy. Okay, so now that we have some basics of how someone qualifies to run for presidency, how we elect our leaders, and how get out the vote efforts work, let's talk about those debates. The recent debate is what inspired this episode. So according to Wikipedia, a debate involves formal discourse, discussions, and oral addresses on specific topics, usually with a moderator, usually with an audience. And in an ideal world, debates are where candidates can meet, discuss ideas, argue their plans for running the country, and each is given equal time to speak. Sounds great, right? However, given today's political climate, how likely do you think it is that either of these candidates will stick to this respectful agenda? No, really. I'm seriously asking you to ask yourself. Look at the candidates we have to choose from today. There are only two viable ones. And ask yourself, well, will either of them follow these guidelines? Well, if you're genuinely debating that, you're adorable. But the quick answer is no. Neither of them will. All debates follow a set of rules, and this one a few weeks ago was no different. For those of you who are newer to elections, both parties agree and approve these rules prior to the debate beginning. Here are some of the rules that both parties agreed to. The first requirement was ballot access. What does that mean? It means that in order to participate, a candidate must appear on enough state ballots in order to reach the 270 electoral votes to win the presidency. Again, 270 is the requirement that is needed in order to win. So if you are looking at a third-party candidate and they don't meet that requirement, what does that mean? Well, that means that their name is not on enough ballots. So even if we look at one particular popular third-party candidate, they are only showing up on a fraction of the ballots across the US. And the amount of ballots that they're showing up on, if this is a big if they were to win every single ballot that they are on, it would still only add up to 89 electoral votes. And that is unfortunately not enough to win. So that was the requirement. That was the first requirement that both campaigns had to agree to, that you had to at least be on enough ballots that would put you on a path to receiving 270 electoral votes. So if you were wondering why wasn't so-and-so there, it's because they don't have a pathway to 270. Plain and simple. Sorry if that upsets you. That is not opinion. That is not an alternative fact. That is just fact. Then there were poll requirements. The candidate must have received at least 15% or higher in support in at least 4 separate national polls of registered and likely voters. They had to agree to neutral podiums, which I don't know why. This just makes me giggle. I honestly, I would love to know why this was important, but apparently the candidates agreed that they will stand at a neutral podium that will be determined by a coin flip. Okay, so heads or tails, you go over here or you go over there. I don't know. I didn't get it, but I thought it was funny. The microphones would be muted, which if I had been watching, I'm sure I would have appreciated that during the debate. Candidates' microphones will be muted until it's their turn to speak. That was probably, wonder if the moderators asked for that one. Both candidates agreed that there will be no audience in attendance, no props, which I think is interesting that there was no studio audience. The candidates agreed that they weren't able to bring any stuff to the debate with them, but they were each provided a blank piece of paper and a pen. So if they wanted to jot their notes down, they could. And then this one I thought was really interesting. Both candidates agreed to no fact checking. Moderators agreed not to fact check either of the candidates during the debate. Their role is simply, they all agree that their role is simply to present the questions, nothing more. So I thought it was a little interesting when I did kind of take my head out of the bubble. That was something that I kept hearing people say. Why wasn't so-and-so, talking about this? Or why didn't they fact check? Because they couldn't. They physically couldn't. They had signed an agreement where they said they would not fact check. So if this is your first time learning about these debate rules, how does it make you feel? It seems like the candidates, both candidates, were placed into a special bubble, you could say, where they were allowed to speak uninterrupted for 90 minutes without any fact checking. This setup allowed them to say whatever they wanted without immediate challenge, because those were the rules. Those were the agreed upon rules. So going back to my earlier point, I was aware of all of this, right? I knew that prior to the debate. I understand how elections work. I understand how crucial my state of Minnesota is to the entire process. And that nothing being said in that debate was gonna change my mind. And so that's why I ultimately decided to skip the debate and avoid all the subsequent commentary, opinion pieces, and podcasts. I knew that no matter what happened during that debate, it wasn't going to affect my vote in November. So there was no point in exposing myself to all of that frustration and noise. So like I said, I have the luxury, and many of my friends who are listening have had the luxury of living through the 2016 and 2020 elections. Like myself, many of my friends, we already know where each of these candidates stand. But for those of you who have never voted before. You are new to this world. Or maybe this is the first time where you're really wanting to pay attention. It can feel overwhelming in trying to figure out where to get started. So I want to share with you my suggestions on how you can educate yourself on the candidates and their stances without having to tune into debates, conventions, rallies, political ads. I'm gonna walk you through I think a smoother way of educating yourself without having to jump into that fray. Ready? The first step, I would say, is go to your local state's Secretary of State's website. This is the starting point I would recommend everyone go to. When you are on your state's Secretary of State's website, you will find information on everything you need to know on how to register to vote, including deadlines. Some of you might be living in a state where if you don't register to vote by a certain date, then you will not be able to vote in November. So make sure that you are aware of those dates. This episode won't be airing for another 4 or 5 weeks from the time I'm recording this. So I hope if you listen to this, you have not missed a deadline. So I would maybe hit pause and go check. If you live in the state of Minnesota, which many of you who listen do, we have same-day registration, so you're fine. But not every state is set up that way. So you want to make sure you go onto your Secretary of State's website and you want to understand what are the deadlines? When do I need to be registered? Where do I go to register? All that fun stuff. You'll also find out things like early voting. Will your state offer early voting? If you're going to vote on election day, it'll tell you exactly where you go based on your street and your zip code. But before you hop off that website, the last thing I want you to do is every Secretary of State's website should have a sample ballot. And this is a ballot that will tell you each candidate that is running per category. So for president, vice president, maybe you're voting for your senator this year, your congresspeople, maybe there's some local school appointees or levies or anything like that. And so you can actually print off a sample ballot, and then we can use that sample ballot to help us research the candidates directly from their own campaign website. So instead of turning on cable news, instead of watching a rally, instead of watching a debate or a convention speech, you then can take this sample ballot and just go right down the list and go directly to their website. A few weeks ago, I helped my nephew go through this exact same exercise. We looked at the sample ballot and we looked up each and every federal, state, and local candidate's website. It took maybe 30 minutes total. It's not as daunting as it sounds. Most campaign sites, they will show you very quickly where the candidate stands on key issues within like 5 seconds of going onto the website. As you start doing your own search, you'll probably start to notice the same pattern my nephew did. And I think this is the most effective way to help you understand who you're going to be voting for at the federal, state, and local levels. Remember, you're not just voting for a person, right? We're voting for an administration that will support the issues that matter to us most. It's great if we're voting for the president, but if we are not supporting that vote by voting for the senator, the Congress, and then for governor in your state, and then the state senator, and state Congress people, down to the school district, well, then we're not helping the bigger picture. And so we need to look at all of the layers that go from the president all the way down. That's what we call down ballot ticket, right? It's one thing to vote for president, vice president. What about that person for the school board? Where do they stand? they're going to be in control of the public education offerings. So you want to make sure you understand and are educating yourself. Yes, there's yard signs everywhere, but a yard sign isn't going to tell you who stands for what. And the school board yard signs that I see are multicolored. So you can't tell, but just, it's not like they're all red and blue, so you can figure that out. But the best way to do that is to print off the sample ballot from your local Secretary of State's website, and use that, go through it, and go directly to the person's website. It takes 5 seconds. Once you're on there, you know very quickly if this is someone that you're going to want to vote for. When you start doing your own research on the candidates this way, one thing I want you to keep in mind is that no candidate is perfect. And I admire the Gen Z community for your ideals, for your hustle, and your positive the positive social changes that you are already bringing to this world. But remember this key thing. The political system hasn't fully caught up yet to your vision for the future. You might find that frustrating, right? When you see a candidate that doesn't completely fit your ideals. And I get it. That can be really, really annoying. Yeah, I've been there before. I remember the first time I started learning about this political world, this political monster. Politics isn't about finding perfection. It's about choosing the candidate or the administration that is most likely going to align most with our values and priorities. Might not be perfect, might not be able to check every single box, but a majority of them, they do. And so picking the team that will vote for the same interests that we have, that we find value in, that's what we're looking for. We are choosing the team that will care about the same things we care about, and will put people in positions of power that will fight for those ideals that we hold dear. Again, they might not be able to do everything on our wish list, but we are picking the person and the team that has the best chance. In the next step is avoid the noise. Stay sane throughout the election cycle. Avoid the talking heads. Go straight to the candidate's website to read their policies and positions. You do not need someone else's opinion. Cable news person, a podcaster, YouTuber, you do not need a content creator giving you their opinion. Ignore it all. Go directly to the source, go directly to what the candidates are saying, learn directly from them. So I've said the best place to start is going on to your local Secretary of State's website. Find out all of the rules and deadlines for voting, for registering to vote. If you live in a state where you have to register months before voting starts. Print off that sample ballot, use that sample ballot to research all the candidates directly from their website. Remember, we're voting for the administration. We are not voting for perfection. We are voting for who most aligns with our values. And avoid the talking heads. But the last rule, or the last life hack, I guess I could say, and this is probably the most important one, and that is to be aware of emotional manipulation. And this is why I say, or I suggest, to stay away from the rallies, turn off future debates, and be cautious of cable news shows, podcasters, social media posts, YouTubers, someone who is clearly pushing their own agenda. And I want you to stay mindful and pay attention of how the content you're watching starts making you feel. If you find yourself getting agitated, or you find yourself getting caught up into a frenzy while listening to an opinion head or a candidate themselves, well, my friend, that is a sign that you might be losing control of your emotions and thoughts, right? They are purposely trying to get you riled up. When we find ourselves in those positions, that's where we can be really vulnerable, and someone could take advantage of that moment where we're getting mad, we're getting agitated. And so I encourage you to just, stay focused on understanding the candidates and their policies rather than getting swept up in all of the hype. If you are new to the political agenda, or sorry, if you are new to the political arena, I genuinely welcome you to this wild world. I am someone that tends to marinate in politics, but I myself have put tons of limits on my own exposure because right now it is just too crazy, even for someone like me that lives and breathes politics. If you want to get more involved, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Instead of showing up at a rally, tuning into a debate, instead of doing everything I just told you, if you're like, Libby, I really don't want to have to do all my own research and do all of that, totally fine. If you still want to get involved, you don't want to do any of the things that I just suggested, then I think, in my personal opinion, the hands down best, sanest approach to learn about American politics is through watching a little known TV show called West Wing. Everything I know about politics, especially the things I learned about politics post high school, right? Obviously, I learned about the Continental Congress and all of that stuff, but like the nitty gritty stuff about what happens behind closed doors, the strategy of it all. I genuinely learned all of that through watching the TV show West Wing. No joke. I learned more about the political arena from this little TV show that started in 1999 than any of my formal education was able to provide. For those of you that aren't familiar, the West Wing follows the Bartlett administration. He is a fictional Democratic president. Through this show, you get to see how the president's staff prepares speeches, handle the State of the Union, how they strategize to get bills passed. They even walk you through how a whip count works, arguably one of the most crucial elements in Congress. Do you know what a whip count is? If you don't, look it up. I agree. I think they are arguably one of the most important people in Washington. If you are new to politics and feeling overwhelmed by debates and the corporate media, then I highly recommend tuning out all of the noise and just simply dive into the West Wing instead. It's a fantastic, safe, and entertaining way to grasp the inner workings of government. So go ahead, grab some popcorn, and start binge watching. I promise you won't regret it. Plus, seasons 1 through 4, you get to look at Rob Lowe. So not too shabby. I will say things that I learned from watching The West Wing, like I already said, what is a whip count? Why is it important? And why is the person who is in charge of the whip count the most important person in Washington? In season 4 and in season 7, they dive directly into an election cycle. So you get to kind of see behind the scenes strategy of how the teams are preparing their candidate for debates. Season 7 does a really good job of breaking out the electoral map. There's episodes dealing with the 25th Amendment. You know, that is something that we had to deal with in 2020. There's episodes dedicated to handling president's health, things being concealed. That is something that's very pertinent, I think, in modern politics, I will say. And so I find it fascinating that when I look back at the show and the story, it's still how prevalent they are today. And so highly recommend giving it a watch. I know it's a silly TV show. You know, like I said, it's surprising a show from 1999 continues to be relevant today. As relevant as it was when it first came out. And so I highly recommend starting your political agenda by watching that silly TV show. And then go to your Secretary of State's website, find out how to register to vote, when are the deadlines to register to vote, and then print off that sample ballot so you can research each candidate directly through their own website. I promise, if you follow these steps, these life hacks, I think you will stay a little bit saner throughout what I am sure will continue to be a crazy election cycle. Okay. I think I have babbled on long enough. As always, we will add to this next week.